Do you guys want to hear a true scary story? For a quick context, I used to babysit for an extremely haunted house, and the oldest daughter, I call her Luna. The youngest daughter, I call her Aura for their own protection and change their names. Luna had an imaginary friend named Pete, who was actually a demonic entity, but Pete actually is not the entity we're talking about today, because there was multiple entities in this home. One of them that I call Bathsheba. I call her Bathsheba because she strongly resembles Bathsheba from The Conjuring. That's the best resemblance I can put to it. She was real-time living, walking nightmare fuel. Now, this year, I remember very specifically, it was the 23rd of December. The family had a tradition where they would open a gift with the girls on Christmas Eve every single year. They'd get like one present before Christmas Day. This family, like the parents worked really hard and really strange hours. That's why I was kind of over there overnights, and I was in high school, so I really had time to make it work. But the parents had asked me, hey, if you can do the Christmas Eve gifts tonight, the 23rd, with the girls, because I don't remember, the next day was super busy or something like that with work or whatever. So I'm like, yeah, of course, like just record it for us. I'm like, yeah, I got you guys. So I had gotten the girls all pretty much ready for bed, you know, bath time, dinner, brushing their teeth, stuff like that. And the last day of the night was for them to open their gifts. So they're really excited, they're giddy, they're sitting at the dining room table across from each other, and I'm about to let them dive in. I'm like, oh wait, like I need to send your parents a video. So I go to grab my phone. This is, God, iPhone definitely still had a home button. This was so long ago. It was like that chunky short iPhone that was only like this big. Probably the one that had the YouTube app on it built in, if you know what I'm talking about. So anyways, I'm like, wait, hold on, don't go yet, because I gotta get my phone. So I grab my phone and I start recording. And then I'm like, okay, go ahead. And they're smiling, and I almost said her real name, oh my God. Aura, the younger one, is like, it smells really bad. She's about to open her present. And I'm like, you know, I'm recording, so I'm like, oh, it's okay, like, we'll fix it later, just open your present. She's like, no, Riley, it smells really bad. And I'm like, just open your present, babe, because I'm recording, you know, and I'm like, God, just let me send this to the parents so I can feel like I did my job and also not forget, because I'm very forgetful. So I just wanted to make sure I got that video to them. So Aura has like a stank face because she says something smells. I'm not even trying to smell, I'm holding my breath, right? And as I'm recording, smiling, all of a sudden you hear a light bulb fizzle out. It sounded like a light bulb fizzing, and then you hear a light bulb like burst. Christmas tree lights, boom. Nightmare, ground zero, all the lights stop working at the same time. I'm like, great. So obviously I look over to the living room where the Christmas tree is, and I'm still like recording, I think. And I'm looking at it for a minute, just like, what the hell? And I think I see something on my peripheral by the Christmas tree. So I'm really looking over there, and then I look back at my phone and it's not recording anymore. Okay, that's not the worst part though. The reflection of my phone, you know, it's like the glass black screen. I see Bathsheba right behind me, and she was sitting, because I was sitting by the island, she's on all fours right behind me, and the reflection of my phone. I start screaming, I'm freaking out. Poor girls, they see it. Well, Aura saw it too, because she looks behind me and she yells, Riley. And all these interactions were so long ago and they happened so fast. However, still remember them so vividly. We calm down. The girls end up, their presents were already like halfway kind of open as all this is happening. So I ended up telling the parents, I'm sorry, I tried to record it. Video didn't want to go today. It was not the day. I just let them open them peacefully, and then they both fall asleep. And I let them sleep in the same bed, because a lot of times I would allow that because the house was haunted as shit and it was terrifying. So I didn't really care what the parents thought. They wanted them to sleep in their own rooms with the doors shut. I didn't care. I was overriding it. Girls are allowed to sleep in the same room. Your house is haunted as fuck. As I'm coming back into the living room area, finally get them to go to sleep, I swear I see something out of my peripheral vision, but I'm not looking again. I never want to look. These entities will try so hard to like get your attention by being so and scary, doing the creep arounds on the wall, the peekaboos, the peripheral vision, like they would just mess with you so much. But I'm not feeding into it this time, trying not to. So I'm walking back out, and then I'm looking at the Christmas tree, okay? This Christmas tree, basically the living room and the kitchen area, it's all one giant open room, if that makes any sense. It was a big room, but it was like the kitchen was here, and then the dining room, and then the living room was over there. And I'm just staring at the Christmas tree, so bewildered about what happened, because I made sure it wasn't the outlet. I plugged something else into it, and the outlet was working. There was no disconnect with the lights. Everything was plugged in. It was so odd how they just blew out. It was a brand new Christmas tree too. They just bought it that year, a pre-lit tree. Weird. So as I'm looking over there in that general direction, something catches my eye from the table. And I look over at the table and I see Bathsheba for a split second again, sitting at the end of the table. And like, what do they call it? Like the king's chair or something? Like the chair at the ends, like the solo chairs that sit at the end of each table. She's sitting at the far one closest to the sliding back door. And her hands are placed in front of her on the table. And with this hand, she's feeling the wrapping paper on one of the gifts. Close my eyes, start praying, freaking out, open my eyes, she's gone. I remember vividly though, I didn't sleep because I was so terrified to go to bed. Because every time I had an encounter with that entity, it was always so intense, and it wasn't as common as Pete or the other entities I would see in the home, so she just really messed with me. And I remember I was miserable the next day on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day because I hadn't slept. And that was one of my worst Christmases. But yeah, next time you are opening presents or this, I don't know what that, did you guys hear that? Be careful opening your presents this year. And if your Christmas tree lights fizzle out, it's probably not the tree. You probably need to cleanse your home. That's all for now. Bye.
Let's talk about the scariest thing anybody's ever told me. If you're new here, hi. I usually talk about scary stuff, and I normally do not film in the daylight or in my car. I'm usually in my office. I genuinely don't know how I forgot this. This story was told to me in high school by one of my very good friends. We'll call him Eric for the sake of the story. I think I've thought about it at least once a month for the entirety of my adult life. Basically, there's this road near my hometown called Seven Sisters Road. It is very famous, and allegedly these 7 women were on this road from the trees. You drive on this road at a very specific time of night and you park your car at the bottom of the hill, your radio will start freaking out and like your lights will start to flash and your car will die. All of these like crazy things that they told us in high school. There are a lot of haunted attractions near my hometown, and a lot of them are not real. They are just some pranks to pull on kids who are curious and send them on an adventure. 9 times out of 10, everyone comes up empty-handed. We all thought Seven Sisters Road was a hoax. When Eric came into English class just ready to spill the beans on what had happened, we all thought he was full of shit. He told us that he had parked his car at the bottom of the hill at the very specific time, and the radio started to go crazy. And then after like 5 minutes, the car died. Nothing crazy. So he gets out of his car and he's filming a Snapchat video. In the Snapchat video, he is just cussing because his car is dead and he can't get to start and he's in the middle of nowhere. He shuts the hood and you can see the dust that had layered onto his hood. As he's vlogging himself getting back into his vehicle, there are like 6 thuds from the top of his hood all the way to the back of his car. Obviously, right after this happened, he was freaked out, got out of his car, and there were a bunch of footprints on the hood of his car, like bare feet prints. The prints went all the way from the top of his car at the hood, all the way up the sun visor, and down the back of the hood. The scariest part is that there were no footprints in any of the dirt outside of the car, and there was nobody out there. And this was years ago, so I don't know if they like built houses out there or what they did with all of that space. When I was in high school, it was just farmland. The craziest part about this is that we all excused ourselves after class and walked out to the parking lot, and sure as shit there were feet prints on this dude's car. And eventually, as we got to the back of the car and he told us this part of the story of when he got home, there were little handprints. That was weird. Oh, not my car dying while I'm talking about a haunting with a car dying. Anyways, that's gonna do it for me. Stay tuned for more ghost stories.
I found my name in a guest book at a cabin that I had never stayed in before. This is Scared with Jess, and today's story is about what I left as a warning for myself apparently years earlier. I found it less than 10 minutes after we arrived. My boyfriend was outside getting the bags from the car, and I was walking around the cabin looking at everything. It was a small rental in the mountains. 1 bedroom, a living room, a kitchen, and another room at the end of the narrow hallway. There was a guest book sitting on the coffee table, and I started flipping through it while I waited for him to come inside. Most of the entries were normal, people talking about the view, the fireplace, nearby trails, things like that. And then I saw my name, my full name. It was written at the bottom of a page dated 7 years earlier. And at first I thought it was someone with the same name. And then I looked closer. It was my handwriting. And I know that probably sounds ridiculous, but I recognized it immediately. I write my capital letters a certain way, and my last name has one letter I've always made slightly too big. Every part of it looked like something I had written. Under my name, there was one sentence. Do not sleep in the room at the end of the hall again. I read it 3 or 4 times, and then my boyfriend came inside and asked what I was looking at. I showed him, and he laughed at first and said maybe I had stayed there before and forgotten. I told him I had never even been to that part of the state. I had never heard of the cabin before we booked it, and he looked at the entry and agreed that the handwriting looked like mine, but said maybe someone was messing with us. That didn't make sense either. We had booked the place 2 days earlier, and no one we knew had the address. I carried the guest book down to the hall and stood outside the room mentioned in the note, and the door was closed. I remember feeling uneasy before I even opened it. It wasn't fear exactly, it felt more like recognizing somewhere I didn't want to recognize. I opened the door, and the room had old floral wallpaper, a metal bed frame, and a narrow closet with a crack running down one side of the door. And the second I saw the closet, I felt sick. I had seen that room before, and I couldn't remember when, but I knew where everything was before I looked. I knew there would be a dark stain on the carpet beside the bed, and there was. I knew the closet door would stick halfway open, and it did. And I knew there would be little scratches on the wall near the floor behind the door, and when I checked, they were there too. My boyfriend asked how I knew any of that, and I didn't have an answer. I took pictures of the room and sent them to my mom. I didn't tell her why, I just asked whether she recognized it. She called me almost immediately, and the first thing she asked was where I was. I told her we had rented a cabin for the weekend, and she asked for the address. When I gave it to her, she went silent, and then she said, "You need to leave." I asked why, and she kept saying she didn't want to talk about it over the phone. I told her I had found my name in the guest book and that there was a warning written underneath it. That was when she finally told me. When I was 8, my parents had rented a cabin in the same area. She said she wasn't sure if it was the exact same cabin, but when she saw the pictures, she knew it was. According to her, we were only supposed to stay 2 nights, and we left before sunrise after the first one. She said I had been asleep on the couch between my parents. Sometime during the night, my mom woke up and realized I was gone. They searched the cabin and found me sitting on the floor in the room at the end of the hall. I was facing the closet, and my mom said I was whispering to someone inside it. When she tried to pick me up, I started screaming and told her she couldn't take me because I had promised to stay. I asked what was in the closet, and she said nothing. It was empty. She told me I cried the entire drive home and kept saying they had left someone behind. I don't remember any of that, not the cabin or the room, nothing. I asked her if I had written in the guest book, and she said she didn't know if there was one. My boyfriend wanted to leave after that. Honestly, I did too, but it was already getting dark, and the nearest hotel was over an hour away. We decided we would stay in the living room and keep the hallway light on and leave first thing in the morning. We shut the bedroom door and pushed a chair in front of it, and for a while, nothing happened. We watched TV and tried to make jokes about how creepy the whole thing was, and around midnight, my boyfriend fell asleep on the couch. I stayed awake. I kept looking towards the hallway, and at some point I heard the chair move. It wasn't loud, just a short scrape across the floor, so I sat up and stared down the hall. The chair was still in front of the door, and then I heard a little girl whisper from inside the room. She said, "You came back." I couldn't move. The voice sounded familiar, not like someone I knew now, but like me, like the way I sounded in old home videos when I was little. The chair scraped again, and this time it moved several inches away from the door. I woke my boyfriend and told him we needed to leave immediately. While he grabbed the keys, I picked up the guest book from the coffee table. I don't know why. I think I wanted to take a picture of the page before we left. And when I opened it, there was a new entry underneath the old one. The ink was still wet, and it was in my handwriting. It said, "I came back, and she was still waiting." We left everything except our phones and wallets, and when we got to the car, I looked at the time. We had only been inside the cabin for about 5 hours, but it felt like we had been there all night. We drove straight home, and I still don't remember staying there when I was 8, but I know I didn't write either of those messages, and I will never go back to that cabin again. Anyway, good luck sleeping tonight.
What is the scariest thing that a child has ever said to you? Listen to this story. So this lady says that she would work for this family and she would clean their entire house. She would vacuum, she would mop, she would clean the kitchen, she would do their laundry, and from time to time she would also take care of their only daughter when they had an emergency or when they had to go into work. The little girl was 5 years old and she explains her as those type of little kids that have so much energy and they never run out of it. She would run around the house, she would follow her everywhere, and the little girl would sometimes ask her to play games with her. And she would play with her because she explains how the house just seemed a little less alone whenever she heard her laughing or having fun. So on this particular day, the mom had to step out and she agreed to take care of the little girl, and she remembers that she was jumping on her bed. She had been standing by the door of the little girl's room and she asked her to stop jumping on the bed because she was scared that she might hurt herself. She explains how the little girl stopped jumping, put a sheet over her head and started laughing, and then she started moving around like if she was a ghost. She was trying to go along with the joke that she was a ghost, so she ends up getting closer to the girl and pulling her legs from above the sheets. The little girl just ends up laughing after she pulls on her legs, and she ends up hiding herself more underneath the sheet. She ends up doing it again, pulling her legs, and the little girl laughed again. You know, everything was normal. It was a dumb game, but she just knew that the little girl was having fun, and that's all that mattered. Out of nowhere, the little girl stays very still underneath the sheet, and tells her, "I don't want to play anymore." She just thought the little girl maybe had gotten tired, and she ends up pulling her legs again. This little girl gets up from the bed to the ground, still underneath that sheet, and tells her again, except this time, it wasn't the little girl's voice. The voice almost sounded like it was coming from an old man. Still under the sheet, she says,
"I told you I didn't want to play."
She explains how her blood pressure went crazy in that moment and she didn't even realize it, but she had screamed out loud after hearing that man voice, and the little girl under the sheet, it was coming from her. The only thing that she thought of doing is running out of that bedroom and closing that little girl's door behind her. After doing this, she did get a little bit curious, so she went back to the hallway to where the little girl's room was, and she put her ear to the door. She fully expected the little girl to either be like crying because she screamed or like laughing because maybe it was a joke. What she heard was the same male voice out loud say, "Ugh, that fucking lady just left." She explains how she immediately grabs the broom and goes out to the street, and she's like sweeping outside until the little girl's mom comes home. I would have been mopping outside, I would have been vacuuming that fucking grass, I would have done anything other than being inside that house. So the little girl's mom gets there and she left. She never even told the mom what had happened, but she never went back to that house again. Fuck that job, I agree. This should be like a scene out of The Conjuring, because what the fuck, bro? I fear that if that happened to me, my legs wouldn't move. I wouldn't have been able to go outside and sweep out there. Anyway, has anything like this ever happened to you guys?
I have only ever shared this story with one other person for fear of being called crazy. The woman telling the story describes what she saw to the best of her ability as a dog man. Yes, I got another one for you. They are popping up everywhere now. And something interesting I've noticed, so many of these stories always are seeing them in similar situations, like crossing a road or seeing them alongside of a road. For the sake of privacy, she said she can't disclose the exact location, but she will say it was in northern Illinois, spring of 2020. During COVID lockdown, her partner at the time was working overnight security. She said it was the property he worked on, as they were not open to normal visitors. So she'd often go out to have dinner with him and just keep him company for a while. And then she'd drive the same route that she would take to get to his house during daylight hours. All that to say, she made it clear she is very, very familiar with the area, and she says she would drive on that same route multiple times per week. So one night she was heading back from his job site, and it was about midnight or 12:30. She said at the time she was driving down a pretty major road, and there was a lot of traffic on both sides. She does say that there is a small stretch on this road, though, that's about 3/4 of a mile, and there's less buildings and less lights. It's more like entrances to little neighborhoods and the occasional park. So as she's passing the stretch of one of these parks, she notices the car in the oncoming lane start to slow down to an almost stop. And this was in a 45-mile-an-hour road. And that's the first thing that caught her attention is like, why are you stopping in a kind of a swift-paced road? And then the next thing she noticed was a very dark, tall figure pass in front of those oncoming headlights. And eventually it would pass in front of her lane before reaching all the way across the road, up and over the guardrail and down the little hill into the darkness of one of those parks. Okay, so she describes this thing as being at least 8 to 10 feet tall. It was black and scraggly, clearly covered in fur or hair. She says it walked on 2 legs, which she could see were bent wrong at the knee, like a dog. And then she could see 2 arms with long fingers, not paws. It had a slight hunch to its back and a large head with an extended muzzle. She said, all in all, it was pretty much the typical image you might see of what people say is a dog man. And then I love this. She says, think cheesy Hollywood werewolf meets shaggy German shepherd. She said it was over so quickly that she couldn't even fully process what she had just seen until she started moving again. The thing that was so weird is that this thing was not swiftly walking or running or anything. It was just casually walking with unusually large, long strides across a very busy road. So as soon as it was over, she calls her partner and he has her describe it to him in as much detail as possible. She said, which is probably one of the reasons I remember it in so much detail. So she and her partner did go back the next day to try to find some prints because it had been raining there around that time and it was really muddy in that area. And she said they did see 1 or 2 imprints that did look like they could have been large paw prints, but nothing clear enough to photograph or cast, unfortunately. And that's it. It kind of ends there. So I don't know, y'all. What are your thoughts? Do you think dogman or are you thinking werewolf? Have you ever seen one in person? This is such a fascinating topic for me. All right, let me know in the comments. And if you have a creepy story of your own of any kind, you got to share it. If you're interested in Creepy Storytime merch, check out the link in my bio. And if you're new here, follow for more Creepy Storytime.
This is a true story from when I was around 2 years old. At the time, my family lived in an old house. One day, I was sitting and playing in the hallway while my older sister watched me. She's 16 years older than me, so she remembers this clearly. After a while, she noticed something strange. I kept staring towards the front doorway, not glancing over every now and then, properly focused on it. She tried distracting me a few times, talking to me and getting me interested in my toys again, but every time, my attention drifted straight back to the doorway. Eventually, she started feeling uneasy and asked me, "What are you looking at?" Without hesitation, I replied, "The Orly Bally Man." She had no idea what I meant, but something about the way I said it really unsettled her. She picked me up and took me through to my mum and told her what had happened. My mum brushed it off. Apparently, not much ever bothered her. A few days later, we're at my auntie's house looking through some old family photo albums. My sister was showing me pictures and I was pointing at people and naming them, Mum, Dad, family members I recognised. Then she turned to a page with a photograph of my granddad. The thing is, my granddad had died around 2 years before I was born. From what I've been told, he wasn't around much when my mum was growing up, and they weren't especially close, so my sister assumed there was no chance I'd know who he was. She quickly started turning the page and said, "Oh, you won't know who that is," but I stopped her, pointed at the photo and said, "Yes, that's the Orly Bally Man." My sister went white. She shouted for my mum and told her everything about me staring at the doorway days earlier and calling someone the Orly Bally Man. My mum looked at my auntie and immediately said, "Do you remember when we were little? Dad used to sing, 'Orly Bally bee' to us." No one's ever told me that. No one had ever used that nickname around me, but somehow when I was 2 years old, I looked at a man I'd never met and said the exact thing my mum and auntie knew him for. My mum always believed that maybe he'd just come by to say hello and sing to one of his grandchildren.
One of the creepiest stories that I've ever received recently comes from a follower that we're going to call Mr. P. And what makes this one so unsettling is that it happened at a real school. Now, Mr. P told me that this happened sometime in 2009 when he was in the 6th grade, and he attended a school in the Philippines, and it was a private Catholic school, and that year he had joined the Boy Scouts, and as part of their training, the Scouts had to spend 3 nights camping on the school grounds. And during the day, they learned survival skills, building fires, tying knots, cooking outdoors, and just fellowshipping amongst one another and having a good time. Now, by the time that the night came, everyone should have been absolutely exhausted, but Mr. P said something felt wrong, and they all felt it. He and one of his friends couldn't sleep, not because of the excitement, but because the entire campus felt unnaturally alive and heavy. He said it was the most, the kind of silence that just makes your stomach tighten, like your body is trying to warn you that something isn't right. So eventually the 2 boys got hungry and they decided to sneak out of their tents to raid the school's canteen. And since it had an open air layout, slipping inside was no problem whatsoever, right? They got in easy and they got what they wanted. So they grabbed a bag of chips and chocolate covered pretzel snacks, and they laughed quietly to themselves, and they started to make their way back through the dark campus. And that's when they heard it, and it was like a clank 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 type of noise, and it was metal chains dragging across the concrete. And at first they ignored it, assuming maybe it was just part of the old campus settling for the night. Maybe it was one of the machines inside the school, but the sound didn't fade, and it only got closer. And every few seconds the chains would scrape louder and louder until it sounded like whatever was making the noise was just around the corner from them. So Mr. P said that they slowly turned around, and standing only a short distance away was this man with no head. And he wore a long white robe that was stained in dark brown patches that looked like old dried red stuff, and it was wrapped tightly around his waist, wrapped around his waist was this massive cross, and behind him he dragged an impossibly heavy long silver chain that scraped loudly across the pavement with every step. And he said this man or whatever never spoke, he never ran, and he said he simply just kept walking toward them. And Mr. P said pure terror took over, and he and his friends sprinted so fast it felt like their feet weren't even touching the ground. And they crashed back into the campsite, waking everybody up, desperately trying to explain what they had both just seen. And their patrol leader immediately dismissed the story, telling everybody that, the boys had simply scared themselves, whatever, what were they doing outside of the tents? But according to Mr. P, that wasn't the whole truth, because the following morning, he and his friend were quietly pulled aside by the chief scout executive, and instead of laughing, the man looked them in the eyes and he told them that he believes them and he absolutely knows what they had seen. And he asked them, not to tell the other scouts what they had witnessed, because he was afraid that the entire camp would be put into a panic mode. And that was enough for Mr. P, right? So he quit the training and he went home that same day. Years later, he finally learned the history of that property. The school sits on the grounds of the historic Lazarus Mansion, and during World War II, the estate was seized and used as headquarters by the Japanese Imperial Army. And according to local accounts, the mansion's basement became a sort of torture chamber, if you will, where countless Filipinos were interrogated and schwacked, and their remains were improperly disposed of. And for decades, faculty members, locals, and former students have shared stories of strange encounters around that old mansion. Many believe the figure that Mr. P and his friends saw that night was the restless spirit of one of the priests who had passed away there during the war. And Mr. P told me that after the camping trip, walking past the mansion every morning felt completely different, knowing the history of it now. And as the sun would go down, he'd avoid looking at the windows altogether, because he said he felt like he could see shadows moving behind them. And he and his friend eventually quit the Boy Scouts for good after that, and now they're adults well into their 30s. But every time they get together, the conversation always somehow finds its way back to that night. And neither of them has ever forgotten the sound of those chains dragging slowly across the darkness. So, let me know what you guys think. If you're from the Philippines or if you've heard this story before, let me know what you guys think in the comments.
The person that sent me the story called it Dream I Shared with My Children. By the way, if you have a story that you'd like to share with our community about glitches in the Matrix, dreams, aliens, cryptids, or the paranormal, you can send it to this email address. And remember, we believe you. For context, this happened on the same night with all of us, and we all woke up the exact same way. My children all experienced it, and we talked about it a few months later while we were laying on the trampoline talking about our dreams. We realized that we had the same dream and woke up the exact same way. Here you go. Okay. Oh, this happened March 2nd, 2026. It happened on what felt like an ordinary late morning. Everything about the house was exactly as it is in real life. Every room is where it should be. The kitchen island stood in the center of the room, the dining table sat beyond it, and the back door looked out to the backyard. Nothing was distorted the way dreams usually are. It felt real. So real that if someone had told me that I was awake, I would have believed them. I didn't know it then, but my oldest daughter would later tell me that the dream had begun before I was even awake. She remembered seeing a human-shaped shadow pass slowly by the back window. She couldn't make out who it was, only that it immediately filled her with fear. She didn't wait to see if it came back. She ran straight to my bedroom. My husband wasn't home. He wasn't in the dream at all. She woke me first. My 9-year-old daughter and my 5-year-old son were asleep beside me. Without asking questions, we all got up and walked towards the kitchen. The house was quiet, too quiet. And then it came. A sound unlike anything I'd ever heard. At first, it reminded me of an airplane in trouble, a deep, rushing roar mixed with a screech of metal and air pressure. It was coming from directly above the backyard, growing louder every second. Instinctively, I looked toward the window. Hovering just beyond the house was something I couldn't explain. It looked almost flattened, like two silver discs pressed together with a glowing red center between them. It wasn't shaped like any airplane I had ever seen. It just hung there, impossibly close. Then every light in the house went dark. The silence that followed felt heavier than the sound itself. Without thinking, I heard myself say, "They're here." The words escaped before I even understood why I was saying them. Outside, the sky changed. The bright daylight faded into a deep crimson that spread across everything. It wasn't sunset. It wasn't dusk. It was as if the world itself had been washed in red. Then the pressure hit. Something forced us to the floor. Not a gust of wind or an explosion. It felt like gravity itself had suddenly become overwhelming. My knees buckled before I even realized that I was falling. The children hit the floor beside me. Every attempt to stand was useless. It felt as though an invisible hand was pressing us into the ground. I started crawling. Every instinct I had was focused on reaching my children. I stretched one arm out toward them, trying to pull them closer while the crushing force held me down. "Pray," I remember saying. Then the back door opened. A little boy stepped inside. He looked about 10 years old. His dark hair was cut short and his eyes carried a sadness that didn't belong on a child. He wore a faded red shirt, khaki pants, and bright white shoes that somehow remained perfectly clean despite the rest of his appearance. His clothes were stained and his face looked tired. He looked like someone who had survived far more than any child should. The moment I saw him, every protective instinct in me took over. I dragged myself between him and my children. "Stay away from them!" I shouted. The boy stopped immediately. He looked frightened, not of me, of something else, something outside. He glanced toward the open door before looking back at me. "You're going to get me killed, lady," he said, almost pleading, as if standing up placed us both in danger. I kept trying to reach my children anyway. The boy stood there for another moment before quietly turning around and walking back through the door. He never looked back. That was all I remembered, or so I thought. Months later, my children and I sat together talking about dreams. One memory led to another until piece by piece they began describing the very same dream. My oldest remembered the shadow before any of us were awake. My 9-year-old remembered watching the boy after he left. She said that he stopped outside the house and he raised his hands, and then somehow a transparent dome formed around us. Not solid, not glowing brightly or anything. It was just like a clear shield that surrounded the house while everything outside remained red. She believed that he was protecting us. I never saw the dome. I was too focused on my children. My oldest remembered him walking away through the backyard without ever turning around. Neither of them remembered him disappearing. He simply left. The last thing I remembered was the weight holding us to the floor and the overwhelming certainty that whatever was happening was completely beyond my control. Then a single thought entered my mind with absolute clarity. "You're not going to die." I never heard a voice. I simply knew those words. The next instant, I opened my eyes. I was laying flat on my back in my own bed, staring at the ceiling. My heart was pounding. I was gasping for air. For several seconds, I couldn't tell whether I had actually woken up or if I was still inside the dream. Months later, I learned that my children had awakened in much the same way. We still don't have answers. We only have our memories. And somehow, when we finally shared them, they fit together like different viewpoints of the same story. The end! How friggin' cool. I absolutely think that this was not a dream, especially because in the beginning you said that it didn't even feel like a dream. It felt like incredibly real, and you would have believed someone if they said, this is not a dream, this is real. I think that you guys were all astral traveling together to one location, to this dimension, this timeline where this was happening. And I don't know what was happening or what that was. It certainly sounded like shape-wise a traditional UFO shape, but it was like a regular child. And it definitely did seem like the child was protecting. Maybe you guys all somehow traveled, like astral traveled together to this dimension, and you weren't supposed to be there. And that's why the boy came in and was like, you're going to get us all killed, like chill the fuck out, basically, and made you stay down and then put a protective bubble around you. I'm not really sure. Like maybe that was a guide or just somebody in general that knew that you were traveling around. But why did you go to this timeline? I have no idea. That is my take on it, though. This was really, really cool. I love when we have like people have dreams and other people have had the same dream. It's all like the same dream. Everyone had it together. And the fact that you all woke up the same time at the same way is also really, really cool. But definitely when people are all in dreams together and you're having the same dream, that's not a dream. You guys are traveling somewhere together for some reason. What reason? I don't know. That's my take. Please let me know what you guys think in the comments. And thank you so much for sharing your story.
I have another scary Appalachian story for you guys tonight. You know the drill. Grab a drink, grab a blanket, and get cozy while I tell you a scary story out in my garden after dark. However, the next few episodes are going to be in my canning pantry, which is essentially my garden graveyard, because the air quality is dangerous to be outside. And so I'm not trying to risk my life in bad air quality, so we're down in the basement for these stories. It's still dark, it's still spooky, so let's get into it. Welcome to Ghosts in the Garden. Back in 2023 to 2024, I lived in Georgia, in a small, quiet area that felt like home to me. I am a country girl at heart, so homesteads, trees, and land always feels better than concrete and high-rises. But that neighborhood, something about it was off, and I could never quite shake the feeling that something watched me. Not a neighbor, not an animal, but something else. But I brushed it off until one night it proved that I wasn't imagining a thing. I was doing my usual nighttime routine, winding down and preparing to lay in bed when I heard a noise. It was subtle at first, like my cat batting around one of her toys, but she's a hider and is always under my bed where she feels safest. But then I realized that sound wasn't my cat. It was a knocking, a slow, deliberate knocking. I got quiet and listened harder. The knocks were definitely coming from the front door of my tiny home. I knelt down, ear closer to the floor to pinpoint it, and that's when I heard something else. There was a voice, clear as day, right outside my door, and it was saying my name. It kept saying, Luna. Hey, Luna. And the worst part is that it sounded exactly like my godmother. Same tone and cadence, and the same way she always says my name. Except she would never come to my house after dark without calling me first. She also would never stand outside saying my name, and something in my spirit immediately told me that this wasn't her. We were neighbors, and so just to be sure, I looked out my window toward her house. I saw that her light was on, and I could see her silhouette walking past her window getting ready for bed. But as I watched, I could hear someone who sounded just like her at my door asking for me. At that point, everything in my body went cold. I didn't have fear, just that eerie, primal awareness that you're dealing with something that's not human. I think I knew what it was. I've heard stories my entire life, but I've never had to experience one personally. The knocking and the voice continued for a bit, so I said some prayers and lit some candles, and then after about 10 minutes, silence. It had left, and I have never heard that again. But I'll tell you this, I will never forget the sound of what sounded like my godmother whispering my name on the other side of that door. This story gave me chills. I cannot imagine somebody knocking on my front door sounding like a family member and knowing that there's no way that it's them. She mentioned she knew what it was in the story, and I would have to guess that was probably a mimic. You guys actually let me know what mimics were when you commented on my video telling me that what sounded like my husband out in the driveway probably wasn't him and was probably a mimic. Let me know if you agree with what I think it is, and if you have your own story to send in, please feel free to email it to me. Otherwise, I will see you again out in my garden in the dark when the air quality is better for another scary story. Bye.
This is one of the creepiest experiments I've ever heard about. I talk a lot about crazy experiences and unexplained phenomena on this series, often which leave people feeling crazy or like they can't trust their own minds. But imagine walking into a hospital and being unable to convince everyone else around you that you're actually sane. It sounds like the start of a horror movie, but in 1973 it actually happened. There was a psychologist named David Rosenhan, and he asked himself a terrifying question. He wanted to know if psychiatrists could really tell who was mentally ill and who was mentally sane. And so he came up with this experiment. He found 8 volunteers who were normal people. They were teachers, they were artists, there was a psychiatrist, there was a pediatrician, and a housewife. And he told them to go to different psychiatric hospitals across America and to tell the doctors there that they had been hearing voices. None of the volunteers had a history of mental illness, and they were all given fake names to use, but otherwise used real details from their lives. The only people that changed details about their lives were the people that were already involved in the medical field to avoid scrutiny or bias in their treatment. But apart from false names and employment details, all other details were reported truthfully. All of the volunteers were then admitted to different hospitals across the US, which included publicly run, underfunded rural hospitals, university-run hospitals with excellent reputations, and a private sector hospital. And rightfully so, these people said they were hearing voices, but then after they were admitted, they were instructed to behave normally. The second they were admitted, they were to stop pretending with their bizarre behavior and to say they felt fine and they were no longer hearing voices and it must have just been a crisis and they were ready to go home. And Rosenhan and the volunteers expected that they would then be released, but instead, every single one was diagnosed with a serious mental illness. Most were labeled with schizophrenia, and even after acting normal for a period of weeks and they would chat with staff, everything became evidence that reinforced their diagnosis. If they wrote in a notebook, it was called compulsive writing behavior. If they waited too quietly for a lunch, that became a symptom too. It was labeled antisocial behavior. Their diagnosis changed the meaning of everything, and even though the volunteers kept telling the doctors the truth, that they felt fine, that they were no longer hearing voices, that they had never heard voices to begin with, it didn't matter, because the longer they insisted that they were healthy, the more it sounded like denial. So think about that. The more people think that you're insane, the harder it is to prove that you aren't. Every argument became another symptom, and they were locked inside for days and weeks, and it actually took lawyers to get many people out. And when they were released with conditions: schizophrenia in remission. Doctors in these hospitals still refused to admit that they made a mistake. And that's what made the whole experiment famous. Dr. Rosenhan published his results, and he argued that psychiatric labels became impossible to escape once they were attached to someone. His study shocked the medical world and brought up serious ethical concerns and debates about how mental illness is both diagnosed and treated. Some people in the medical field praised his efforts for exposing serious flaws, and others criticized his method because they said that it wasn't really an ethical way to go about getting the results that he did. Journalists and researchers since then have even questioned how truthful his results actually were, and it's still debated decades later. But whether you agree with the conclusion or not, the central fear still lingers, which is, imagine walking into a building under your own free will and then finding out that no one believes a single word you say, not because you're lying, but because the professionals judging you have already decided what you are. To me, that's what makes the Rosenhan experiment feel less like a psychological study and more like one of the scariest true stories ever told, because there's no external spirit or monster or ghost. It's the possibility that reality itself can be taken away, and no matter how calmly you try to explain it, no one would believe you.
A series of spooky stories, women's intuition. Back in 2013, I was watching my 2 baby cousins, one boy, one girl, who were toddlers at the time. We had just got done with lunch. When they were playing, I had told one to quit playing with the blind cord. It would hurt him. Well, while they were playing, I was washing dishes, and the little girl really left my side, so she was beside me as I was drying a dish off. About to start another one. I had this overwhelming feeling that I needed to go check on the little boy. I bolted out of the kitchen because I had never felt that way. When I got into the living room, he had the cord around his neck, leaning forward, choking himself. Oh my God. He was already changing colors, and I unwrapped the cord from around his neck and just wrapped him in a hug, and he looked at me and said, "Thank you, Mimi." Oh, which is what they call me. I've never felt so scared in my life. I was in tears. That is terrifying. I was driving to leave my ex. I was driving from his parents' house and didn't have my seatbelt on. I was driving 65 on mountain roads, knowing that I drive these roads every day. I had this gut feeling that I needed to put my seatbelt on. When I grabbed my seatbelt and put it on, I looked up right as it clicked in, and a steer was in the middle of the road, and I hit it doing 65. Totaled my car, walked away with only a seatbelt bruise for 2 weeks. My dad used to work in the oil field. I had a weird feeling that I needed to call him while I was in school. So I called him, and 5 minutes into the call, there was an explosion. He hung up, and later that night, he came home and said one of the pipes blew up, sent 2 men flying to their deaths. Had they not called them, he would have been the third. I had a dream a few years ago, and the main thing was that my sister fell to her death. It was so vivid that I can still remember the look on her face when she realized she had slipped and I couldn't save her, just watched her fall. I tried to let it go and shake it off, but I was too stressed, so I finally called her just to tell her to not go up anywhere high for a while. She said she'd be careful, but told me that she just did that to calm me down. Then my aunt, who never calls us for anything, calls her 30 minutes after me, just because she had a strong feeling that she should call and check on her. This finally scared my sister enough that she told her employees about it and had them climb up the tall ladders to swap out the displays that were scheduled for that day. She usually climbs up herself, but we were all convinced that something horrible would have happened that day hadn't she listened. I think whoever was protecting her knew that she blew me off, so she made sure that they sent the message another way. Reminds me of the dream where I saw either a friend or myself and a giant flash like car lights / lightning. I woke up at 1:55 a.m. and was panicked. I thought I had killed someone. I made myself go back to sleep, woke up for the day, and instinctively looked at my local department's Facebook page. They talked about someone passing away from an entirely different city than where I lived. I told myself I hope I didn't know this person, and it turns out that it was my friend in a singular car crash that happened to be the post about. A couple of years ago, I was riding with my sister on an ATV, and I suddenly had a vision that the ATV rolled over and we crashed, and I broke my spine. I literally saw the whole thing. Hours later, there was a fatal ATV crash the next village over. 2 years ago, I had a dream where I talked to this boy that I used to play with on the weekends when I went to my dad's when I was little. In this dream, he said that he was happy that he had the chance to know me in this lifetime and wishes me well in the next chapter of my life. I woke up crying because I was 3 months pregnant at the time, and the dream felt too real. 2 weeks go by and I'm having breakfast with my dad. My dad tells me that he ran into the boy's parents earlier that week, and they told my dad that the boy had been stabbed when he got mugged and passed away the same night that I had the dream. Holy shit. I told my dad about the dream, and he was too stunned to speak. My mom had been sick for a while, and I had been taking care of her and giving health updates to her twin sister ever so often. The day my mom passed, I called my aunt, and when she picked up the phone, she was sobbing uncontrollably, and before I opened my mouth, she said through her sobs, "She died, didn't she? She died." We talk about women's intuition, but it's mother's intuition. But we haven't talked about twin intuition. That's like a whole different type of connection. Me and my sister went to a mall we hadn't been before. It was 3 hours away from our hometown. We started walking around the mall, which was partly closed. A group of 3 men were walking around as we passed. They all looked at us. We went into a store, then another. We got out of the second one and went to a two-way rail. I noticed they were following us, and I told my sister. They stopped following us after noticing that we noticed. One was later found shoplifting, and a pocket knife was found in his pocket. Also, I got this comment earlier. We can read the comments ourselves. And as you can see, my response, why are you here? You know what I mean? They were like, to read the comment. Okay, well, don't complain. If you're on my page and you want to watch my content, or you want to sift through the comments yourself without listening to me do it, you can do so, and you can do so quietly. Because I don't need to hear complaints from people. I've said it before and I've said it again. This is not a suggestion box. If I want opinions, I'll ask for them. So it's as simple as that. You know what I mean? You don't have to watch my videos. You don't have to listen to me read off the comments. You don't have to do literally any of that. You don't have to be here, period. You really, really don't have to be obnoxious in my comments either. So please don't forget that I am getting my own website. I'm getting my own app. I'm very, very excited. I'm going to do long form content. I'm actually cutting a work day because I'm going to dive more into my content as well as some other ventures. And then I'm also about to start taking some classes in the fall semester. So I feel like it's what I should be doing. Plus, I've been having a lot of issues with my neck and stuff again. And it's making it really hard to do a lot of clients because I'm slumped over the table all day long. And recently, I don't know if it's carpal tunnel, at the start of carpal tunnel or what it is, but my wrist has been really bothering me as well, which is my dominant hand. And I do a lot of repetitive movements, so that's not shocking. A lot of cosmetologists end up with that as well. So I would like to obviously continue doing what I do. I love doing nails and I really love my clients and stuff, but it's time to condense my days again and do things that aren't going to make me absolutely miserable in pain. And as much as I hate that, because I started off doing 5-6 days a week, and then I got down to 3, and now I'm going down to 2. But I just can't do it. My neck has been hurting so bad. And then whatever's going on with my wrist, it could be just something like a fluke where it's just irritating me because it's just been redundant movements or whatever. But I don't want to keep pushing it and then it end up being something, because I do genuinely have like degenerating discs in my neck that's causing issues, and it gives me such bad headaches, and it's a miserable end to the day. So I'm hoping that with this new like website and the new app and stuff like that with the long form content, that I will be able to really like be in my content creator era. Now, I don't know if I mentioned it on my post last night, but I did mention it in my story. It is subscriber based over there. So there will be like a subscription or whatever. It's not anything like super crazy. But also, I think she said that there was an option to do a free subscription. There would just be ads on my videos. I don't exactly know the full thing of it, but she did say it was one thing that there's no algorithm. Like, it's my page and my page only. You don't have to worry about not seeing me ever. And then I'll be able to like interact and people can give suggestions on what videos to do. Like I did a video the other day talking about the conspiracy theories and send me down a rabbit hole. I've been watching conspiracy theories today. So just stuff like that. Subscribers will get like gifts from me and stuff like that. It's gonna be really, really exciting. I'm really, really, really excited about it. Sorry to make this so long-winded. I just wanted to give a little bit more of an in-depth description of what was going on and potentially do another video about it later on. I don't know. Those videos don't really do very well, so I just kind of throw it in here with these. So I will see y'all at the next episode of Women's Intuition's Spooky Stories.
What would happen if you followed a mimic? Now, I've always wondered this, because you hear these stories of someone hearing like their mother knocking at the door or telling them to come in the kitchen. But what would happen if you actually listened to the mimic? Here's a story that might tell you why you should not follow a mimic. There was this young man named Aiden. Now, Aiden lived with his grandfather and his two parents. Now, one day, Aiden was hanging out in his bedroom and he's playing a game. Well, he hears his parents like pull in and he looks out the window and sees them getting out of the car, unloading some groceries into the house. So he's like, awesome, man, we're gonna have something to eat. So he goes back to his game and then he hears his mother say, Aiden, come in the kitchen, I got some food. And he, at this time was like in the middle of a battle. So he's like, hold on, Mom, I'll be there shortly, I'm in the middle of a battle. And she goes, come on, Aiden, hurry up, come in the kitchen. And all of a sudden, he said he got a phone call, and it was from his mom. And he's like, why is she calling me when she's in the kitchen? So he picks it up, and his mom's like, hey, honey, we're at the grocery store. Do you want us to get you anything? And he goes, what do you mean you're at the grocery store? You already got groceries. You're in the kitchen. And she goes, what are you talking about? We just got to the grocery store. And he looks out the window and sees that their car is not there. And then right at this moment, he hears his mom saying, you better get in the kitchen right now or you're going to be in trouble. You better come eat. And like, he's like, I got to call you back, Mom. He hangs up. So he goes and he locks his door and then he calls his mom right back and is like, look, when you get home, call me. I'll help you bring in the groceries. So about 25, 30 minutes later, his mom calls him and she's like, honey, we're home. Come outside. And he said he was getting ready to go out of his room, but he looked out his window first and their car wasn't there. So he's like, you know what? I don't know what to do because I don't know like who really is my mom right now. So as he's sitting in his bedroom, right, he hears his parents come home and come into the house. And all of a sudden his mom comes up to his door and starts knocking. And she goes, Aiden, let me in. And he's like, not right now, Mom. And she goes, what are you talking about? Let me in. Unlock this door. Why do you have the door locked? And he's like, no, I'm not opening the door. And his mom goes, all right, I'll just get the key and unlock it. So he grabs like this baseball bat that's chilling in his room and he's prepared for this thing to come in. And like at the time, he still thinks whatever, was calling his name in the kitchen, this is them. So he sees the handle jiggle and the door open and it's really his mom. And he can tell that it is actually his real mom. And she goes, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, nothing. And he sets the bat down and she's like, you're acting weird and stuff. And there's food in the fridge if you're hungry. So he didn't know what to make of that. Like, what did he just experience? and he didn't feel like he could tell his parents about it. So he decided to talk to his grandpa, who was kind of like his best friend at the time. So he goes to his grandpa's room, and he's like, Grandpa, he's like, have you ever seen something like you can't explain? And he goes, what do you mean? And he tells the story about like how he thought his mom and dad had came home, he seen their car and everything, but it wasn't actually them. And the grandpa goes, oh no. And he goes, what's wrong, Grandpa? And he says, well, when I was a young boy, I grew up in a small Polish village near Warsaw. And he said, we had this term that was this long Polish word, but it roughly translated into evil twin. And he said they believed there were these evil spirits that could take the form of anyone and would try and trick you and lure you, out into the woods. So his grandpa said, when I was a young boy, my father had me chopping wood outside. And I hear my grandma's voice coming from the forest. And she's saying, come in the woods. I baked you a pie. Like, come out here. It's nice and warm. Like, you'll like this pie. And he said, he was so hungry, like he almost started to go out into the woods until his father ran and grabbed him and said, get back in the house. And his father locked the door and said, if you hear someone calling you from the woods, don't ever go. Don't respond. So he said, when you encounter an evil twin, as they called it, they will follow you for the rest of your life. And he feared that maybe this thing had followed him here to America. And this is what Aiden had seen. A couple weeks later, his parents are gone, and it's just him and his grandpa. And they're watching this World War II documentary in the living room. Well, all of a sudden, the wind picked up, and a strong breeze pushes the back kitchen door open, and they hear it, open up. So his grandpa's like, I'll go and close the door real quick, and I better lock it so it doesn't blow open again. So his grandpa goes into the kitchen, but after about 10-15 minutes, he doesn't come back. So Aiden's like, Grandpa, are you all right? He goes into the kitchen, the back door's still open, and he doesn't see his grandpa. He goes throughout the house, he's yelling his name, he doesn't see him anywhere. So he goes out, to the back door, and he's yelling his grandpa's name, he doesn't hear it. So he calls up his parents, and his parents come home immediately, and they call the police, and they do this big search throughout the neighborhood and into the woods. And they end up finding his grandfather in the middle of the woods. He is completely confused and doesn't know who he is, doesn't know anything, doesn't remember anything. So they bring him back home and everything. Well, Aiden said that, they chalked this up to dementia and said he was diagnosed with a severe case of dementia. But Aiden, in his mind, suspected, because of the series of events that happened before this and his grandfather going out to the kitchen when the door opened, that this was the evil twin thing that his grandfather had talked about. And he said, although his grandfather had completely lost his memory, from time to time, he would say to Aiden, is my brother outside? Is my brother out there? And he couldn't figure out why, his grandfather would keep saying that. And then he realized maybe this thing appeared as his brother, and it lured him, into the woods.
This true story was submitted by Moon Pie, and it's pretty heavy, so let's get straight into it. Not exactly Appalachia, but I used to date a guy who lived in upstate New York. These things took place about 2014. We were planning on me moving in with him. I spent many nights there while we were moving my stuff in, and eventually I changed my address to share his. After moving in, I began to notice really strange feelings. It always felt like I was being watched. Every time we were intimate, it felt like we had an audience. It was awkward and creepy. Then the middle of the night stuff started happening. I would be sound asleep and awakened very suddenly from either being shook or something hitting the bed. At first, I really thought it was the boyfriend, but he was always asleep when these things occurred. Several times I was jolted awake by someone screaming in my face. I'd wake up and no one was there, and the boyfriend would be soundly sleeping. But one night, as I was yet again awakened from a deep sleep, there was a dark, cloaked figure standing in the corner of the room, obviously watching us sleep. It was male and very tall, and the figure was blacker than black. I couldn't see any features or his face at all. He was wearing a hood and just stood there silently staring. Then he was just gone. Just like that. At the time, shows like Ghost Adventures was very popular. So I got the idea of doing some EVP sessions, which I did in the living room. The boyfriend didn't take it seriously, so I did the EVP sessions when he wasn't home. It would just be me and the dog there. The apartment was above a garage. There were no other apartments in the building, and the landlord's house was far enough away that I could blast the stereo without disturbing the landlord. The property itself was in a very rural area, so there weren't any neighbors beyond the 3 houses the landlord owned on the property. Any neighbors would be a good 5-minute walk away, and anyone else even further than that. I did the EVP thing during the day when no one was around. Boyfriend and landlord were at work. It was just me and the dog. For anyone that isn't familiar, EVP is short for electronic voice phenomena. You start recording, it could be digital or analog, doesn't matter. You could address any spirits that might be there with you, and in theory, they answer you. But you can only hear it on playback for some reason. You don't hear it in real time. And I caught voices. I actually didn't know everything the voice said until years later when an audio specialist analyzed it for me. I'll circle back to that. The one thing I did hear was when I asked how many spirits were there with me, a male voice distinctly answered 2. I stopped sleeping in the bedroom after seeing the shadow man. I would hang out with the boyfriend, but when I started getting sleepy, I would move to the couch, where the dog and I would stay the rest of the night. I swear that dog was protecting me. So, about maybe 4 or 5 years later, an audio specialist, my friend, analyzed the EVP recording for me. He confirmed that the male voice said 2 when I asked how many spirits were there at the time. The part that still sends chills down my spine is later a female voice can be heard on the recording, and she says, "Go to bed." At first I thought it was attached to the property because people did pass away there. But now, looking back, I can clearly see that my ex definitely had some serious inner trauma. Real or imagined doesn't matter really. He had trauma, as well as a very weird relationship with his family. His dad was very abusive when he was young, and he himself is a recovering alcoholic. I do not wish any bad on him, nor do I blame him for any regrets. It just didn't work, and that happens. I just really hope he found love and happiness after I left. Oh man, I could tell you about a ton of weird stuff that happened there. And when you're the one experiencing it, there's always this element of, it's gotta just be my imagination. That didn't really happen, did it? I can't tell you how many times I was abruptly awakened from a sound sleep in that same bedroom. I have felt the bed violently shake, like someone was standing there jumping on the bed, or hit it really hard with a fist. There were also times I felt whatever it was shake me awake, like it physically touched me, not just hitting the bed. Seeing the cloaked figure in the corner, however, was the last straw. That's when I refused to sleep in the bedroom anymore. I was sad when we broke up, but I was not sad about not having to go there anymore. Wow, Moonpie. I've got to say that I wouldn't have been able to even sleep on the couch after that. Excellent story. Thank you for sending it in. Keep sending me your stories and suggestions, guys. It's all on my page, if the information on how to do that. But that's been Jay's Haunted Appalachia. Keep Appalachia haunted, y'all.
This story is a haunting, and it's also really sad. I'm going to preface with that. Okay, yeah. It's a sad one. This is about a person named Hannah. It was early fall and she had no income and couldn't find work. Drew offered Hannah a job on a cannabis farm in California. It was a new experience and a new culture for her, and it was also a shock, just completely different from the life she had lived. She felt like it was really happy, positive, and a welcoming place, and it felt like family to her. Drew and Hannah started to realize that they had feelings for each other, and in her words, they fell for each other hard. They ended up moving into his main house together, which was a rickety logging house. She was really excited by this. It was a whole new feeling of adventure and happiness. This is basically like a cabin in the woods, right? That's where they're living.
Right.
So they moved in together, and the next morning, Drew left because he had 4 gardens to go tend, and he would be gone for 2 to 3 days. He was gone. Hannah was alone in the house, and she started cleaning around the cabin. She found this, which she describes as like a dead space in the wall that didn't make sense with the layout of the house. Like if you looked at the house from the outside, it didn't make sense that there was nothing behind the wall.
Oh, I see. Got it.
She didn't investigate it too much because she didn't want to be nosy, but when Drew got back and they were hanging out and talking, she told him about it and showed it to him, and she felt like there was something behind the wall. So Drew grabbed a chainsaw and cut into the wall, and they discovered there was a room behind it. It smelled bad inside. At one point, it had actually been a shower.
Like a bathroom or just like a shower?
A shower.
Huh, interesting. That's like so weird.
What was also
a shower room.
Well, what was weirder was there was an O-ring on the ceiling, like something you would attach a meat hook to. Weird, right?
That is weird.
The floor was also covered in old razor blades, which didn't make sense. And not like razor, like razor blades.
Yeah, it's obviously like a torture chamber.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Obviously, because there's a shower, there's a drain. And they're like, okay, where does this drain to? So they went into the basement. They were looking around. Hannah went up on a shelf by the water heater. And behind the water heater, someone had dug a path, and a set of tunnels opened up that went further back into the house. This is crazy, right?
Wow. Cool.
They went through the tunnels and discovered...
I'm not great at telling stories. I think that anybody can do what I do. There's no art to it. But I think that people enjoy the stories that I tell because I'm sincere. When I tell these stories, I put myself in the story. And I don't want people to just hear my stories. I want people to be able to feel them. I think more than ever, storytelling is very important. We need storytelling. We need more storytellers. We need this younger generation to understand who we are as humans, where we came from. Everyone in every background has some sort of story that they can tell from family members, from experiences. And I think it's important for us to keep that, to continue to allow this younger generation to experience that and pass that down to the next generation. What's interesting about a story is it brings people together. Doesn't matter who you are. When you tell a good story, everyone will listen. And I've told this story many times. I sat in a jail cell, surrounded by some of the hardest convicts, the worst criminals. There was a man who had taken other people's lives. And they're all sitting around in this jail cell, listening to me tell scary stories. And you could see, these big guys, these, hard, tough dudes who just were shaking, who were scared, who were just, gasping when it got to those exciting parts of the story. And I think that's what storytelling is all about, bringing people together, that no matter who you are, what your background is, what your situation, everyone can enjoy a good story. And so I think more than ever, we need to fight this push for technology, we need to go back to the old ways of telling stories and allow this younger generation to experience that. Have you noticed how we've not built any new cemeteries? Like any city, town you go to, they still have the same cemeteries they've had for hundreds of years. And people pass away all the time, yet these cemeteries never seem to fill up. There are always open plots of land where you can bury someone. So where are the bodies? Where are they going? What's happening to them? I've got this interesting theory that I've heard. Now, in the 1970s, there was this movie called Soylent Green. Now, Soylent Green was this movie starring Charlton Heston, and it was about this futuristic city in which the world had become overpopulated. They had destroyed the oceans, they had destroyed the earth, and times were really rough. And none of the people in this city could afford to buy any groceries. They couldn't afford just the normal things we get every day at the store. So, in order to keep them from starving, they were sold this very cheap stuff that was made in the factory. It was like a squared cracker or ration, and it was called Soylent Green or yellow or red. And the people, because they were hungry, because they were starving, they would protest like every day. They would go out into the streets and have these huge protests. But these trucks would come around and they would pick them up and take them away. And all these people were like disappearing. So Charlton Heston's character, who is this detective, he starts investigating this mysterious case, which leads him to the factory where they make this Soylent Green. And what he discovers is that the Soylent Green is made from humans. And when you kind of look around now, right, the same things are happening that happened in that movie, right? We are slowly destroying the oceans, the earth. Groceries have become unaffordable. They are now a luxury to most. And you wonder, the foods that we're getting that are so cheap that we're able to afford to buy, the only stuff that we can eat, what is it made of? Now, I'm curious what you think. Why do you think we are not building any new cemeteries?
Let's read a couple true scary stories submitted by viewers. Welcome to the Creepy Cozy Cottage, where creepy and cozy meet. So grab a blanket and get cozy, because it's creepy cozy time at the Creepy Cozy Cottage. Give me a follow so you never miss a story. My boyfriend and I went to Epping Forest for the day out, as it was his childhood woods where him and his family used to go. As soon as we pulled up in the car, I had this overwhelming feeling of dread, like I was being watched from the distance. He asked if I was okay, and I brushed it off and said, "Yeah, I'm okay." We went into the woods with his 2 dogs. I was too busy with my head in my phone and lost my boyfriend. That's when I saw this tall, dark figure hunched behind a tree. It was watching me with pale black eyes. I started to run for my life because I knew I was in danger, and whatever that thing was wanted to hurt me. So I was screaming and running for my life. I had no service to call my boyfriend, and as I was running, I could hear this thing changing from my boyfriend's voice to my voice while calling my name. I found him at the end of the tree line by the trail, and I told him what happened. And when I looked back into the woods, I saw the creature lurking, watching me, and I felt a huge wave of emotion. I've refused to go back since that day. This second story was submitted by Anonymous. About 14 years ago, I was driving with my sister from our parents' house to my house. We lived in the same community, so it wasn't far. It had just gotten dark out. We came to a 4-way intersection with a 4-way stop. When we pulled up to the stop sign, we could see there was something on the side of the road, right near the stop sign, illuminated by porch lights of a house nearby. Looked super dark, and we thought it might have been a bear because we live in the mountains. So we sat there and waited to see if it would move. It slowly stood up from its crouched position on two legs in a slow, smooth manner. It was dark, skinny, and it had wings. I swear it had wings. Not pretty wings, tattered, ragged wings. And they were just as dark as the rest of the figure. We freaked and floored it the rest of the way to my house. We still have no clue what it was. I know there has been at least one other sighting about 10 miles from where we saw this, but no other ones that I know of. This still freaks me out to think about. I wonder what it was. If you guys have any idea what that might have been, leave it in the comments below. And as always, if you have any scary stories of your own you'd like to share, just send me a DM.
I had a seizure after making eye contact with a woman in a hotel window, and 4 years later I found out who she was. When I was younger, my family used to go to Mackinac Island almost like every other year, until a couple years ago and it suddenly stopped. Growing up, I'd always hear a story about a widow whose name was Frances Lacey. People would say, and it was a local story, so people would say that she one day walked into the woods and then she never came back. And I didn't think much of it until our last trip. For some reason, I felt really uneasy while we were there, and it wasn't just nerves, it was a general feeling of being watched. We decided to do one of the trails one morning before we were going to go bike around the island. So the trail would take you into the woods, through the woods, past a cemetery, through like this grand hotel, like to the back of it, and then it would take you back to town. From the moment we stepped onto this trail, I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder. I felt like somebody was following us. I felt like I was being watched, somebody was following me. Of course, every time I looked back, nobody was there. But the feeling kept getting stronger, and as we got to the Grand Hotel, I caught myself looking up to the top floor window. For some reason, the first window that I looked at was on the top left corner of the hotel, and there was an older woman in the window. She wasn't glowing, she wasn't transparent, nothing like that. She was just standing there perfectly still. The second we made eye contact, my body felt like it was not in control anymore. I couldn't move. I could hear my heart pounding through my ears. Like everything changed. I tried looking back down, but I couldn't get my body to do it, and then the next thing I know is I'm waking up in a hospital. My family told me that I had had a seizure, and I tried explaining to them what I saw in the hotel window, but they didn't believe me. They just chalked it up to me being confused about the events that happened, and honestly, I did start to believe them up until yesterday. I was watching videos about the island, and a local story came up about a lady named Frances Lacey. Then they showed a photograph of what she looked like, and my stomach completely dropped because this was the same lady I saw in the window. Same hairstyle, same clothing, everything was the same face. I had never seen that photograph in my entire life. I had literally only heard her name briefly through these local stories. So my family thinks that I'm scared to go back because I'm scared of having a seizure, but really I'm scared of going back, seeing that Grand Hotel, looking up the window, and seeing her standing there again.
Dad hasn't been taking the divorce well. Yeah, it's not been going well. And I mean, I get it, you know, he's upset that him and my mom had a falling out. But that doesn't justify him following us when we moved into a new neighborhood. The new community was supposed to be a fresh start, according to Mom. But it's pretty hard to start over when your dad has his car parked across the street all the time. Like, seriously, all the time. Like, I'm pretty sure he sleeps in the car. And one time when we went to the block party, I swear he was recording our interactions with the neighbors. Like, don't get me wrong, I love the guy, but he needs to get a hobby or something. Just start over like Mom and I have. He's also tried to talk to me when Mom isn't around. He wants me to come with him, which I always say no to because, you know, like, why would I go with someone that's practically my stalker? He's also weirdly insistent that I stop going to church. Like, how random is that? I don't care if we are blood related because at the end of the day, the community is more important than any family member. And when I ask her about Dad, Mom says that our problems don't matter since, you know, we'll all be ascending soon anyway. And I don't know, I guess she's right. Still, you know, I can't help but worry and just hope that my dad will stop being paranoid over nothing.
I need to tell you guys this ghost story. This story was sent into my email, and if you have any ghost stories, paranormal encounters, or scary stories that you want to share, you can send them to the email in my bio. Hey Ellie, I've come across some of your videos online, and honestly, I really loved them. And that's why I wanted to share a paranormal experience my friends and I had years ago. It's something that still creeps me out to this day. My friends and I live in a small town in Italy, or specifically, we live in Sicily. And we've always been a really close-knit friend group. We used to spend entire days together. This incident happened in September of 2022. School was about to start again, and to celebrate the end of summer, we decided to spend the evening at a friend's house that we'll call Lucy. Lucy lived in a more isolated and darker area, and because of that, we usually went all together and only during the day. Very rarely at night. It was around 7 p.m., and it wasn't completely dark yet when we arrived at Lucy's house. We spent a really good evening together. We joked around, played games, ate, watched a movie, and as the time passed, we realized that it was almost 11. So each of us started texting our parents to let them know that we'd be heading home soon and that we would all be walking back together. We said goodbye to Lucy and started heading down the stairs. Now, keep this detail in mind. A friend of mine, Sebastiano, and I were the first to reach the front door, since the others were still halfway down the stairs joking around. I opened the door, and I was the first to step outside, while Sebastiano stayed inside just a bit longer to wait for the others, but still really close to each other. While we were waiting, I suddenly heard someone scream, just a few steps away from us. At first I didn't pay much attention to it because I thought it might be the neighbors. Maybe they were watching TV or something. But then I heard it again. And this time, Sebastiano heard it too. It was loud and very clear. We decided to move closer toward the scream since our view was blocked by parked cars. As we slowly walked, we saw, in the middle of the street, a woman kneeling, making strange movements with her hands like she was calling or summoning someone. Sebastiano and I immediately called the others, who rushed down in a split second. Once we were all together, we quietly and carefully decided to get closer to the woman, mostly because that was the same road that we had to take to get home. Then suddenly, she stood up, like she knew that we were there. She didn't do anything. She just stood there, completely still, like a statue, facing and looking at really nothing. At that point, my friends and I were frozen too. Not knowing what else to do, we ran all the way down that street. And when we reached the end, now a few meters away from the woman, we stopped to catch our breath and try to calm down. We decided to look back up the hill one more time and realized that she had disappeared. At that point, we didn't know what to think anymore. Everything had just felt so confusing, and we even started to wonder if we had imagined it. We began slowly walking and talking and thinking of things that it could have been. And then suddenly, we saw someone coming down the slope. As we slowly got closer, we recognized them. It was the same woman from before, but in a much more distorted way. Like it was something non-human walking, in a sort of zigzag swaying motion. At that point, we were hit by a mix of fear and curiosity, so we stayed still. We decided to investigate a little. The woman stopped in the middle of the street. But this time, something happened that I've never been able to forget. She stopped, stared at us without moving, tilting her head as if someone had just snapped it, and then started walking sideways with her legs crossed toward a bush, disappearing from there in the blink of an eye. In the end, a friend of mine called her dad, who drove over and took us home by car. From that moment on, we never talked about it again.
When I was 6 years old, something appeared in my doorway, and after that night, my mom was never the same. Scary story time. Back in the summer of 1995, my family moved into a beautiful 2-story house surrounded by 2 acres of woods. It was painted a deep blue that stood out against all the greenery. My dad worked the graveyard shift, so I usually only saw him after school. Somehow he convinced my mom to let us get Bailey, a goofy yellow Labrador, who quickly became my best friend. My mom had been a veterinary technician for years and was definitely a cat person, but she tolerated Bailey since he was technically my responsibility. Ironically, she had no problem feeding a deer that regularly wandered up to her second-story balcony. For the first few months, everything felt completely normal. Then one night, Bailey woke me up by growling and snarling at my bedroom door. Still half asleep, I fumbled for my glasses, and as my vision came into focus, I froze. Floating in the doorway was a strange mist. It filled nearly half the doorway, hanging motionless in the air. It was semi-transparent, almost glowing, and unlike anything I had ever seen. I was only 6 years old, so I screamed for my mom. As she rushed towards my room, I glanced back at the doorway just before she flipped on the lights. I watched her walk straight into the mist, and in that instant, the light came on and it vanished. That experience terrified me so badly that I couldn't sleep without a light on for weeks, but it turns out that I was afraid of the wrong thing. A few weeks passed without seeing the mist again, although Bailey refused to leave my side. Late one night, Bailey climbed off the bed and began whining at the bedroom door until she woke me up. Holding onto her collar, I slowly opened the door. My mom was standing alone in the kitchen. She wasn't doing anything. She was just staring at the cabinet with a 1,000-yard stare, gently swaying back and forth. I called her name and nothing. She didn't answer and she didn't even react. Panicking, Bailey and I backed into my room and locked the door. Over the next several weeks, I caught her wandering through the house late at night several more times. Eventually, I told my dad. One evening, while we were playing cards together, my mom casually asked him if he'd been sitting at the foot of their bed the night before. The problem was, my dad had been working all night. As Christmas passed, her nighttime wandering became even stronger. She wasn't just walking anymore. She'd open cabinets, move objects around the kitchen, and once even took a loaf of bread out and placed it neatly on the counter before wandering away. Then came the night I'll never forget. After having a nightmare, I asked if Bailey and I could sleep in my parents' room. My mom had finally agreed, although Bailey eventually wandered back to my bedroom. Sometime during the night, I woke up to my mom shouting, "What do you want?" I looked towards the foot of her side of the bed, and standing there was the silhouette of a man. He wore what looked like an old cowboy hat. He never moved nor said anything. He just simply stood there watching us. My mom grabbed me and we ran out of the house. Even as we fled, the figure never moved. We spent the rest of that night at my grandmother's house. The following day felt surprisingly normal. My dad had taken the day off and we spent the afternoon together before grabbing pizza nearby. That night, everyone went back to bed. I left my bedroom door slightly cracked. Sometime after midnight, I was jolted awake by the sound of my bedroom door slamming open against the wall. In the darkness, I could barely make out my mom standing in the doorway. I called her name but got no response. When I put my glasses on, I saw that she was staring straight ahead with a completely blank expression. She swayed ever so slightly and she was holding a kitchen knife. I curled into the corner of my bed while Bailey stayed pressed against my side. For what felt like 10 endless minutes, she simply stood there, and without saying a word, she finally turned and walked away, slamming my bedroom door shut. Seconds later, my dad rushed over to their room but couldn't open their door. No matter how hard he pushed, it wouldn't budge. My father weighed around 250 pounds, yet he couldn't force it open. Morning finally came and my mom called from the other side, saying she was trapped inside their bedroom. When my dad finally got the door open, we discovered what had been blocking it. An enormous cedar chest had somehow been dragged nearly 15 feet across the room and wedged firmly against the door. It was packed with family photos, books, blankets, and other heavy belongings. It looked like an old pirate's treasure chest. My mom weighed maybe 130 pounds. She couldn't even move it during the day. To this day, my dad still has no explanation for how it got there. We moved out 2 days later. My mom continued sleepwalking until I was around 16 years old. I never saw the mist again. I never saw the man in the cowboy hat again. And honestly, I hope I never do. And that's the end of the story. So do you think the mist was what caused OP's mom to start behaving in that way? Or do you think there was already something living in the house long before they ever moved in? But yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And if you have your own spooky story that you'd like to share with me to read, you could send it to my email in my bio. But yeah, let me know your thoughts. I'd love to read it.
This encounter happened when I was in my mid-20s, living with my family in Washington State. Most of the strange experiences in my family seem to happen late at night, and this was no exception. It was past midnight on a weekend. I was in my bedroom watching a movie and slowly drifting off to sleep. I had a loud window air conditioner running when I suddenly heard a woman crying outside my bedroom window. At first, I was more annoyed than scared. We lived in a quiet neighborhood, but there was always the occasional neighbor who liked to party late. I checked the clock. It was almost 1:30 a.m., and I had to be up at 6 for work. What really bothered me was how clearly I could hear her crying, even over the noise of the air conditioner. Eventually, I stood up on my bed and looked out the window. The street was completely empty. No people, no movement, just the streetlight glowing. I got annoyed, closed the curtain, laid back down on my bed, and eventually fell asleep. The next thing I knew, my alarm was going off. The next day, my dad and I were outside when I casually mentioned that I heard a woman crying outside my window. He stopped and looked at me and said, "Really? I heard her crying outside my door." As we were talking, my mom drove up, got out of the car, and made her way towards us. She overheard what we were discussing, stopped in her tracks without saying anything, went inside the house, and came back with holy water that our local padre had blessed. She quietly blessed the house and then went about her day. Later, she smiled at me and said, "You're just like your dad." After that, things seemed to calm down. From time to time, when I passed my dad in the hallway, he would casually ask, "Have you heard the woman crying lately?" I'd smile and say, "No." He'd nod and reply, "Me either." It wasn't until later that my dad told me something he hadn't mentioned before, that he had actually heard the crying before I did. He also admitted that at one point he thought he had heard her crying inside his room. Sometimes my mom would overhear our hallway conversations, roll her eyes, and go right back to whatever she was doing. Nothing like that ever happened again, but the quiet understanding between my dad and me stayed.
Get your late night snack. This is Last Thread Before Bed, episode 28. This is a little series where I read scary stories from Reddit before I go to bed, and I try not to get nightmares. So boom, let's get into it. So tonight's story is on the subreddit Ghost Stories thread from user Pandora's Bottle. I knew this family that grew up on the shores of Lake Monroe in Indiana. They lived on a site at a boat dock and managed the slips there. There were 3 sons living and working there with their mom. The boys and I were drinking around the campfire one night, and the eldest was telling me about how there was an abandoned town beneath the lake. Its citizens relocated and the valley flooded to form the reservoir for the wealthy to enjoy. I then asked for their spooky stories growing up on the lake. All 3 brothers immediately launched into an extremely detailed account of the haunting in the back room of their home. The room in question was a later addition to their log cabin. This bedroom was built later, probably in the 70s. Kinda tacked into the bank, with minimal insulation and cheap windows, raised on stilts to be level with the rest of the house. First, they said this room was always colder than the rest of the house. I laughed and said that was normal for a cheap addition. They got serious and insisted that it could get cold enough in that room to see your breath, even on warm summer nights. They had always found the room creepy, but it was their guests who had the really hellish nights there. Every time a guest stayed in the room, they always mentioned feeling like a hostile or threatening presence, and some had even been woken by slaps, whispering, or hissing. One morning, they often found guests had moved to the couch in the den. That felt a little anticlimactic, so I goaded them a little. Surely they had a better story for me. That's when they told me about the ghost girl. Some nights, the 2 eldest brothers would go catfishing in the dark. That's how they first saw it, a pale white light bobbing in the darkness along the shoreline. It flickered like fire, but wasn't the right color, they said. It didn't stand out at the time because they figured it was just another person noodling like they were. It wasn't until the morning that they realized that the person they had seen had been halfway up the side of a sheer cliff, bobbing along at a walking pace. After that, they had seen it many nights but didn't talk much about it. But one time while night fishing around 3 a.m., they finally decided to check it out a little closer. This time, the light was bobbing along a low shoreline, so they approached in their fishing boat and called out to her from behind. They could see it was a girl or a woman in a white nightgown, and she was barefoot. This is textbook scary movie shit. We didn't stop or even slow down. Intrigued, they circled to get in front of her and greeted her again, asking if she needed help. They swore to me in that aggressive way that young men do when they're actually scared that it was a little girl in a white nightgown, with no face. I was told this story in 2013 on the shores of Lake Monroe, Indiana, by a bunch of boys who had previously been trying to act macho and flirt with me. But when this topic came up, their demeanor palpably changed. I know the details aren't terrifying, but it was the delivery that got me. Either they had rehearsed for this their whole lives, or this was something that had really happened, just a couple hundred feet from where we were sitting. That was a really good story. I love stories from lakes, beaches. Follow for more scary stories.
We listen, we don't get scared, and we don't judge. Let me give you guys a story time of when me and my friends were channeling spirits because of a documentary that we seen, and one of our friends flew across the room. So y'all, we seen a ritual on TV, like it was a witch, like talking about how she would channel spirits and all of that. And we listened, and then afterwards we sat in a circle. Whole time we were 12 years old. We sit in a circle, we started like chanting things. I don't remember what we were saying, but we started chanting things. We held hands and we did it. And we had a candle that was lit in the middle. And I don't remember what else. I think we had salt or whatever. I don't remember. But anyways, we started like chanting and we started going like this in circles. And I could feel it. So basically, if you have a dead relative, right, and you want to channel that person, that's your time. And we didn't know that we are summoning dead spirits. We thought that we are cleansing ourselves or whatever, but we didn't know we were doing that. So we continued doing it until one of our friends starts screaming. And we're like, girl, what's going on? She's the room, guys, started getting dark. I kid you not, it started getting dark. It felt like it was nighttime outside. So we're looking outside and this girl is speaking in a language that we don't understand. She's screaming. She's taking off her clothes. Oh my days, it was so scary. We were behind the couch. We were standing behind the couch because we were like, girl, what is wrong with you? What are you doing? She started chasing us. One of our friends started praying. She started praying and she went to go get like a cup of water. She started praying and she was
might have known the story of real life boogeyman.
Throwing the water, and I was like, fire in the name of Jesus. I pray for this water. I turn it into holy water. And then she was throwing the water at this girl and she screamed. She screamed, guys, and she flew across the room and she hit the wall and she fell down. And we thought she stopped, right? Because like she was kind of like unconscious, low key, because she hit the wall hard. And when she fell down, we kind of tried to wake her up, and she started again. She started chasing us, guys. She was throwing things at us. She was throwing plates at us. We're running around the house. We locked the door because we were scared. We locked the door because we were scared that her mom, one of the girls' mom the girl's mom, whose house we were at, we thought she was gonna catch us doing this, so she locked the door and we wanted her to knock when she comes, guys. And then we obviously put the key somewhere. Worst mistake ever. This person is chasing us. She's breaking plates, mind you. This is not her house. This is not the girl's house who we are at. Do you get it? This is not where she stays, okay? She started throwing us with plates. She started chasing us, and we continued praying. I didn't pray. I was running. I was running, and I didn't hide myself because I was like, if I hide and this thing catches me, what's gonna happen? And we started praying, and yeah, she kind of moved back as we continued praying, and then I just started screaming because at this point we've been praying, and it's not helping. I started screaming real loud, and I started screaming, and I screamed, and I closed my eyes. I kneeled down. I started screaming. One of the girls was praying, and I don't know what happened, guys. I fell unconscious. We got woken up by someone by a man that we didn't know. That man broke down the door because we locked ourselves inside the house, and we all fell unconscious somehow. I don't know what happened, right? We fell unconscious and they broke down the door because we were inside. They thought somebody maybe might have tried to rob us or something because there were broken plates on the floor. There were knives. There were cutlery was on the floor. Spoons, all those things. They were on the floor. So the mom was confused. When they woke us up, we had to tell the truth, y'all. We had to tell the truth because lying was not going to get us anyway. Because if we lie, who are we going to say robbed us? Because they're going to call the police. And we told them what happened, and they called all our parents and they brought a pastor, and the pastor prayed for us. And the girl who was still screaming again was screaming, and she was like, I'm part of the devil worshippers. I was the one that came up with this idea because I wanted to initiate them. And I was like, girl, what? At 12 years old, you were trying to initiate us? She's like, she showed us that video on purpose because she was told that she needed to initiate us, right? And then eventually they prayed for us. We swept. Listen, when I got home, I got a beating because our parents had to basically contribute money to buy that woman's thingy, that woman's, what do you call this, that woman's plates, katsari, and all of those, because we were the ones that channeled that spirit, and we paid for it. And when I got home, I got a beating because why am I channeling spirits? And my mom never wanted me to chill with those girls ever again, and I still did in corners because we were all in the same school.
Did James Franco really catch an alien, or is this one of the smartest publicity stunts in a long time? I'm April, and I tell you weird, spooky stories. James Franco has the internet completely divided after he posted some black and white video of his security footage showing what he is claiming to be an alien wandering around his property. In one of the clips, it appears to be peeking through his window, and another one, it's wandering out his property before it disappears into the darkness. Franco hasn't given his viewers very much context, which has fueled more speculation. So we all want to know what's going on. There are 3 theories that people keep coming back to. Theory number 1 is that he actually captured something that we can't explain. Some people believe that this is a genuine extraterrestrial encounter. They point to the figure's unusual appearance and that Franco keeps releasing footage with no explanation. They believe that he is actually documenting something as it unfolds. Theory number 2, that it's a publicity stunt. And I think this might be the theory that's getting the most attention. Hollywood has a long history of using mysterious viral marketing campaigns. And they'll do this to promote upcoming shows, movies, or projects. It's said that by posting these cryptic videos, Franco is doing exactly what they want, making millions of people talk about it. Then there's theory number 3 that I'm seeing a lot in my comments, is that he's simply just trying to stay relevant. As we all know, James Franco was canceled for very good reason. He's not in the spotlight the way he once was. A lot of people believe this is less about aliens and more about just getting his name back out there. Whether people believe the footage or not, if that's what he's trying to do, it's working because everyone is talking about James Franco. And the truth is, there's no proof that these are genuine extraterrestrial encounters. Other than when he made the video saying, this is the thing I wanted to show you, he's not addressing if it's a prank, if it's promoting a project, or if he genuinely believes that he's having extraterrestrial encounters. Do you think James Franco actually caught something unexplainable, or do you think he's just trying to stay relevant in conversation, or maybe this is some marketing stunt?